Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going exploring the world of White Lady legends.
Ah, yes, the White Lady. It's a figure that pops up in cultures all over the world, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is, and we've got a ton of stories to dig into today. But before we get into specifics, I think it's worth taking a step back and kind of just defining what we're talking about. When we say White Lady, what are the key elements that make up this ghostly archetype?
Right. Well, at its core, you're looking at a female figure almost always appearing in white clothing, and she's almost always tied to a story of tragedy or sorrow.
Yeah, a lot of sadness and loss surrounding these figures. And they're not just kind of like random ghosts floating around, right? There's usually a very specific story attached to them, or reason why they're haunting that particular place.
Absolutely, you got it. It might be a story of betrayal, like a woman scorned by her lover or a wife who was unjustly imprisoned. Or sometimes it's about a mother searching for her lost child or a young bride who met a tragic end.
It's interesting you mentioned those themes because they do seem to run through a lot of the legends we're going to be looking at today.
Absolutely. And I think by looking at how those themes play out in different cultures, we can get a really interesting glimpse into societal anxieties, attitudes towards women, even cultural beliefs about death.
That's what makes this so much more than just a bunch of spooky stories, right? It's like a window into the human psyche.
I like that, a window into the human psyche. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
All right, so where should we start this global ghost hunt? I'm ready to get spooked.
Well, why don't we begin in Brazil with the Dama Branca, or Mulher de Branco. She's often seen as the ghost of a young woman who died in childbirth or suffered a violent end. And sometimes she even recounts her tragic tale to those who encounter her.
That's creepy. It's one thing to see a ghost, but to actually hear her story, that would be terrifying. But what's really fascinating is that the Dicionário do Folklore Brasileiro suggests a possible link between this legend and the very real issue of honor killings of young women.
It's so interesting how these legends often reflect those darker aspects of a culture's history, isn't it? And in this case, the Dama Branca might be a way of expressing, the vulnerability and powerlessness of women in a patriarchal society.
And we see echoes of that in Monteiro Lobato's Europeias, where he tells the story of a woman starved by her husband. It's just brutal. It's a reminder of the control men often exerted over women's lives.
And the fact that he feeds her the remains of her supposed lover, it's a pretty twisted detail. It really speaks to the anxieties and power dynamics of that time.
Yeah, definitely adds a whole other layer to the story. Let's move on to Canada. They've got the White Lady at Montmorency Falls. Have you heard of this one?
Oh, of course. In French, she's called Dames Blanches, and she's said to be the ghost of a young woman who lost her fiancé in battle. Driven by grief, she throws herself into the falls wearing her wedding dress.
Such a classic tale of love and loss. And what's interesting? I was reading that there's even a smaller waterfall nearby that's named Chute de la Dame Blanche, White Lady Waterfall in her memory.
It is kind of romanticizing her tragic end in a way. It makes you wonder how these legends evolve over time, how they shift from cautionary tales to something almost celebrated.
That's a great point. Okay, how about the Czech Republic next? They've got Perchta of Rožburg, the White Lady of Rožem Castle. And what's cool about her is that there's actually historical documentation to back up the legend.
Ah, yes, the letters she wrote detailing her unhappy marriage to Jan of Lichtenhütten. Those letters paint a pretty vivid picture of her suffering and mistreatment.
Exactly. And then there's the legend that Jan, on his deathbed, cursed Perchta after she refused to forgive him.
Oh, wow. And so some say that explains why she haunts various family estates even after her death.
Seeking some kind of justice or retribution, maybe?
It's a possibility, isn't it? It adds another dimension to the White Lady archetype, doesn't it? She's not just a passive victim. She's resisting the injustices she faced even in death.
And that defiance, it resonates even centuries later. All right, let's keep moving. What about Estonia? What's the story behind the White Lady of Haapsalu Castle?
This one's all about forbidden love. A canon falls deeply in love with a woman who disguises herself as a choir boy just to be near him.
That's clever. But I'm guessing it doesn't end well for her.
No, sadly no. Her deception is discovered, and she is punished by being immured in the chapel wall.
Oh, wow. Talk about a brutal fate. But there's got to be a ghostly twist, right?
Of course. On clear nights, during the August full moon, it is said that you can see her ghostly figure at the baptistry window, mourning her lost love.
It's a haunting image. It makes you wonder if she finds any peace in that haunting, or if she's just forever trapped in her sorrow.
Maybe it's a little bit of both, She serves as a reminder that some wounds never truly heal, but maybe there's a strange kind of solace in remembering and keeping that love alive, even through haunting.
Okay, let's head to Germany next. From what I read, they've got a ton of white lady legends. It's like White Lady Central over there.
Oh, they do. They do. They even have different names for them depending on the region. But no matter what you call them, they're definitely a prominent part of German folklore.
All right, let's start with the White Lady of Plassenburg Castle. There's a bit of a mystery surrounding her identity, isn't there?
Yeah, that's right. Two women are often linked to this legend, Countess Kunigunda of Orleman and Bertha of Rosenberg. Kunigunda allegedly murdered her children while Bertha was overthrown and met a tragic end. Both stories definitely fit the White Lady mold.
So is the Plassenburg White Lady one or the other, or is it some kind of combination of the two?
That's the mystery. Some people believe she's one or the other, while others see her as a composite figure embodying the suffering of women throughout history. It's like she's become an archetype for all those who were wronged or silenced their individual stories, blending into one haunting presence.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. What about the White Lady at the Berliner Schloss? She's got a pretty ominous reputation, doesn't she?
She does. People claim to have seen her before several significant deaths throughout history. Her appearances seem to coincide with moments of upheaval or tragedy. She's definitely an unsettling figure.
Do we know who she is? Is there a story behind her appearances?
The most popular theory is that she's Aniceto, the lover of Joachim II. He promised to protect her, but after he died, his son John George imprisoned Anna, and she eventually died.
Another story, betrayal and broken promises. It seems like a recurring theme with these white ladies.
It does, doesn't it? And it makes you wonder if Anna's ghost is still seeking some kind of justice or recognition for the wrongs that were done to her.
It's amazing how these stories weave together history and the supernatural. You never know what to believe.
That's part of the fun, isn't it? The mystery, the uncertainty. It keeps us guessing.
So you mentioned we've got the Dusseldorf Castle White Lady, the Friedland White Lady, the Haus Ossel Ghost, and the Alberg Forest Monastery Ghost to talk about. Give me the rundown.
Well, Dusseldorf Castle White Lady is Duchess Jacobin, who was supposedly murdered by her husband. She's said to appear before fires almost like a warning or a manifestation of her rage.
It's like she's become a vengeful spirit.
Right, and then there's the Friedland White Lady, who was cursed by her own father because she didn't produce a male heir. Now she haunts the castle and the forests, and it's said that she'll strangle anyone who speaks to her.
Yikes. Definitely not a ghost you want to strike up a conversation with.
Nope, not at all. Then there's the Haus Ossel Ghost. During the 30 Years' War, a nobleman locked his wife in their cellar, fearing she'd be unfaithful while he was away. He never returned, and she died alone and forgotten. Now her ghost wanders the property, searching for her lost love.
That was just heartbreaking. A reminder of the human cost of war and the impact it has on families.
And lastly, there's the Alberg Forest Monastery Ghost. Not much is known about her specific story, but she's said to haunt the ruins of this monastery nestled in a forest known for its caves and sinkholes. It's just a very eerie setting.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in Germany. We've got so many more white ladies to explore. What about Hungary? What kind of stories do they have?
Well, Hungarian white ladies are typically the spirits of women who died violently, suicides, murders, deaths in prison, and often they're tied to specific locations and even identified as historical figures.
That's interesting. It really blurs the lines between legend and history.
Absolutely. And one of the most compelling examples is Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess. She was accused of torturing and murdering hundreds of young women. Definitely a dark side to the white lady archetype.
It's like her cruelty in life was amplified in death, turning her into a truly monstrous figure.
Exactly. It's a reminder that these figures aren't always sympathetic or benevolent. They can be forces of terror.
It's a fascinating and complex archetype, that's for sure. Okay, ready to move on. I'm eager to hear what kind of white lady legends we'll find in Ireland. All right, so we've made our way through Brazil, Canada, Czech Republic, Estonia, and Germany, and we've uncovered some really interesting white lady tales.
It is fascinating how each culture seems to put its own spin on the archetype, adding different layers of meaning and complexity.
Totally. It's like we're seeing the same basic ingredients, but the recipe changes depending on where we are in the world.
Exactly.
So now we're heading to Ireland, a land known for its rich folklore and mythology.
Right.
What kind of white lady stories can we expect to find there?
Well, one of the most well-known is the White Lady of Charles Fort. Now, this one is a bit different from some of the others we've discussed because her story is less about seeking revenge and more about a deep and unrelenting grief. The legend says that she took her own life after her father killed her husband on their wedding night.
Wow. Talk about a seriously messed up family drama.
Mm.
But I guess that makes her haunting all the more poignant. She's not trying to scare people or right or wrong. She's just stuck in this loop of sorrow.
Right. It speaks to that enduring power of grief, how it can linger even after death and shape the way we interact with the world.
And in this case, it's turned this white lady into a figure of immense sadness, just forever trapped in that moment of her greatest loss.
Yeah, and they say you can even hear her screams on the anniversary of her wedding night. It's like that trauma is just etched into the very walls of the fort.
Spooky stuff. Okay, let's jump over to Malta. They've got a couple of famous white ladies, right?
They do, the White Lady of Verdala Palace and the White Lady of Meginena, and each one offers a unique perspective on the archetype. The White Lady of Verdala Palace is said to be the ghost of the Grand Master's niece who jumped to her death to escape a forced marriage.
That's a story that unfortunately still resonates today.
Yeah.
The idea of being forced into a union that you don't want is just heartbreaking. It speaks to the lack of agency women have had throughout history.
Absolutely. And her act of defiance, even if it led to her death, it transforms her into a symbol of resistance, against that patriarchal control. Her haunting becomes a reminder of the lengths women have gone to fight for their freedom.
So what about that other Maltese white lady, the one in Medina? Does she have a similarly tragic backstory?
Well, her story's a little bit different. She's said to appear to people of all ages, but with different warnings for each. Children are told to go home to their parents. Heartbroken teenagers are advised to find someone new, and elderly men are tempted to join her shadow.
Interesting. So it's like she's this multifaceted figure of guidance or even temptation, depending on who she encounters.
It is kind of like she's taking on different roles depending on the needs of those she meets. For children, she's a protector for heartbroken teens. She's a voice of reason, and for the elderly, well, perhaps she represents a longing for companionship or an escape from the world.
It really highlights that adaptability of the white lady archetype.
Yeah.
How it can be molded to fit different narratives and address various anxieties or desires.
Yeah, exactly. It's a testament to the enduring power of this figure and its ability to resonate across generations and cultures.
All right, let's continue our journey north to the Netherlands. What can you tell us about their white ladies, the vrouwen in Witte or Witweven? I've heard they're a bit different from what we've seen so far.
You're right. They have this dual nature. They can be both benevolent and malevolent. Sometimes they'll help people offer guidance or aid in childbirth. Other times they're more mischievous, abducting babies or punishing those who have wronged them.
So they embody those unpredictable forces of nature, capable of both creation and destruction.
Precisely. They represent a kind of wild feminine energy that can be both nurturing and dangerous. It's a reminder that the supernatural world isn't always neatly divided into good and evil.
It makes encountering a Witweven a bit of a gamble. You never know which side of her you might run into. Are there any specific stories attached to them?
Of course. One of the most famous is the White Lady of the Schinveld's Bossen Forest. She's said to be the ghost of Lord Lambert Reynardt's daughter who died in a fire at their castle farm. Now she wanders the forest, appearing at midnight or on nights with a full moon.
That's such a classic white lady image. The white dress, the moonlit forest, the lingering sorrow. It really taps into those primal fears and fascination with the unknown.
Absolutely. And the fact that she's tied to a specific historical event, the fire at the castle farm, it grounds the legend in a sense of reality and makes it all the more believable.
Okay, ready for our next destination? Let's head to the Philippines and explore the very famous White Lady of Ballet Drive.
This one is an interesting blend of folklore and urban legend. She's said to be the ghost of a woman who died in a car accident on that road and now appears to people asking for a ride.
It's a classic ghost story setup. The hitchhiker who vanishes into thin air. But what's really interesting is that there's some debate about whether she's a genuine legend or a modern invention.
Yeah, there's a theory that the legend was actually fabricated by a reporter back in the 1950s, but regardless of its origins, it's definitely captured the imagination of many Filipinos and continues to be a popular topic of conversation, especially among taxi drivers.
It just goes to show you how these legends are constantly evolving, being shaped and reshaped by each generation. And sometimes the line between fact and fiction becomes so blurred that it's impossible to know for sure what's true.
And maybe that's part of what makes these stories so appealing. The mystery, the uncertainty, the possibility that they could be real, that we might encounter a white lady ourselves if we're not careful.
Okay, let's move on to Russia. What kind of white lady tales do they have?
Well, one of the most fascinating is the legend of the Maidens of Uli from Siberia. It's the story of Bulzuhai Duhai, a young woman who was forced into a marriage she didn't want. Her husband treated her terribly, and eventually she took her own life.
Another tragic story.
Yeah.
It seems like a recurring theme with these white ladies is that they're often victims of circumstance caught in situations they can't escape.
Yeah, and in this case, Bulsihai Duhai doesn't just become a ghost, she becomes a Zion, a vengeful spirit, and she joins a group of other female spirits who haunt men on their wedding days, luring them to the underworld.
It's like this powerful image of female solidarity and retribution. They're taking their pain and turning it into a force to be reckoned with.
It is. It's a reminder that these white ladies aren't always just passive figures of sorrow. They can be powerful agents of change, seeking justice for the wrongs done to them.
Okay, our White Lady World Tour continues. Where to next? How about Serbia? What do they got?
Serbia has the legend of the dead woman in White of Koprivica. There are actually two versions of her story. One says that she died in a car crash on her honeymoon, the other that she hanged herself after being jilted at the altar.
Either way, it's another tale of love and loss with that added element of a restless spirit.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what she's searching for.
Right. It's interesting how these stories often leave room for interpretation, allowing the listener to fill in the blanks and create their own version of the legend.
It adds to the mystery and the intrigue. We're left to wonder what motivated her actions in life and what drives her spirit now. What if she's not seeking revenge or justice? What if she's just looking for understanding, for someone to acknowledge her pain?
That's an interesting perspective. It adds a layer of empathy to the story. It challenges us to see these white ladies not just as monsters or victims, but as complex beings with their own motivations and desires.
Okay, let's move on to Switzerland. What's their white lady all about?
While the White Lady of Rulebo Castle is believed to be the ghost of Humida Schulek's first wife. He basically cast her aside because she didn't bear him a son, and now her spirit haunts the castle ruins.
Another example of a woman wronged by a patriarchal system. No wonder she came back as a haunting figure.
And some even say that she's responsible for the disappearances and deaths of several people. It's almost as if she's exacting revenge on those who trespass on her domain.
That's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
Okay, let's wrap up this European leg of our journey with a quick stop in Thailand. What kind of white lady stories can we find there?
In Thailand, there's a story of a vengeful spirit named Dao, or Duan, who haunts this deserted house. Unlike a lot of the other white ladies we've talked about, her origins are a bit unclear. We don't know her backstory, her motivations, or why she's chosen this particular house. All we know is that she's considered responsible for the deaths of several teenagers who dared to enter.
It's a reminder that sometimes the scariest stories are the ones with the fewest details. Our imagination fills in the blanks and creates something far more terrifying than any concrete explanation.
That's true. It makes you wonder, what is it about the unknown that frightens us so much? Is it the fear of what we can't see or understand? Or is it the fear of confronting the darkness within ourselves?
That's getting pretty deep. But I like it. Okay, so we've explored a lot of fascinating white lady legends from Europe. But now it's time to cross the Atlantic and see what kind of stories await us in the United Kingdom and the United States. Okay, so we've crossed the pond and landed in the UK, a place with tons of folklore, and you guessed it, white lady legends galore.
The UK's got no shortage of ghost stories, that's for sure, and their white ladies are just as diverse and fascinating as the landscapes they haunt.
Well, let's start with England. What kind of stories are we dealing with here?
Well, one of the most interesting ones, I think, is the White Lady of Blenkinsop Castle in Northumberland. She's different from some of the others we've talked about because she seems less interested in, revenge or sorrow and more focused on guarding a hidden treasure.
Okay, that's a new one.
Yeah.
Most of the white ladies we've encountered are driven by, pretty dark emotions. This one sounds a bit more protective of her treasure.
It really is, and it makes you wonder what her intentions are. Is she trying to share her wealth or maybe test someone's character to see if they're worthy of it?
It's almost like a fairy tale with a moral lesson hidden within the supernatural elements.
Exactly. And it speaks to that idea that these legends often serve as cautionary tales. They warn us about the dangers of greed or betrayal or straying from the right path.
All right. So what other English white ladies do we have on the list?
Well, there's the running lady of Beeford in East Yorkshire. She's definitely not benevolent. She haunts a stretch of road called the Beeford Strait, and she's often seen running across it toward a junction.
Okay, that's creepy. I can only imagine driving down a dark road and seeing a ghostly figure running toward my car.
It plays on those deep-seated fears we have,
Yeah.
the unknown of what might be lurking in the shadows.
And it makes you think about how we try to explain those unexplainable things. Is she a real spirit causing accidents, or is she just a figment of our imaginations fueled by fear?
That's what's so great about these legends. They leave so much room for interpretation. They let us grapple with our own beliefs and anxieties.
What about the White Lady of Portchester Castle? Her story sounds pretty sad.
It is. It said that she jumped from the castle walls while trying to save her child who had fallen, and now she wanders the castle, forever reliving that awful moment.
Such a powerful image of a mother's love. It makes her haunting even more tragic.
It does. It really taps into those fears we all have about losing those we love. The idea that even in death, we might not be able to let go.
Okay, we talked about the White Lady of Worstead Church in Norfolk earlier, the one with the famous photograph.
Oh, right, yeah, the photo from 1975 that shows her sitting in a pew during a church service. But there are all these conflicting stories about her. Some say she's a benevolent spirit that appears on Christmas Eve to watch over the church, while others believe she's a harbinger of death.
It's so interesting how the same figure can be interpreted in so many different ways.
Yeah.
Is she good or evil, a protector or a threat? It really highlights how subjective these encounters can be. Our beliefs and expectations really shape how we see the supernatural.
Absolutely. So what about the White Lady at Oakhampton Castle? Have you heard about her?
I have. She sounds pretty terrifying.
Yeah, she does. An old ballad describes her having this sable coach, a gaunt bloodhound, and a headless driver. She's described as being ashen white, like someone who's been dead a long time. The story goes that she was this noble woman who murdered her husbands and children and is now cursed to wander the castle ruins collecting blades of grass.
That's a pretty specific and creepy curse. It definitely makes her haunting sound more about punishment than anything else.
It does. It plays on our fascination with the idea of karma, The idea that our actions have consequences even in the afterlife.
Okay, so what about the White Lady of Barry Pomeroy Castle? What's her deal?
Well, her name is either Matilda or Margaret, and she's said to be a harbinger of death. Anyone who sees her in the dungeon is doomed to die. The legend says that she was starved to death by her own sister in that very dungeon.
Another tale of betrayal and cruelty. So many of these white ladies are victims of human wickedness. Their hauntings become a reflection of that darkness.
Right, and it makes you wonder what their motives are. Are they seeking revenge, or are they simply warning others not to repeat those same mistakes?
Okay, let's wrap up our English White Lady tour with the one from Radford. What's her story?
Ah, the White Lady of Radford. It's a classic tale of forbidden love. A young woman fell in love with a man her family disapproved of. So she snuck out to meet him, but their boat capsized and she drowned.
Such a tragic story. It's a reminder of how powerful love can be, but also how societal pressures can sometimes lead to tragedy.
And her haunting becomes a symbol of both that enduring love and a warning about the dangers of defying social norms.
We've covered a lot of ground in England. What about Wales? Do they have any good white lady stories?
Oh, they definitely do. Their White Lady Wen, sometimes called Dines. Mune Gwyn is a popular figure in Welsh folklore. She often appears on Halloween to warn children about misbehaving.
Oh, so she's been incorporated into those traditional celebrations, almost like a spooky babysitter meant to keep kids in line.
Exactly. It's how folklore is often used to teach moral lessons and reinforce those societal values. And when you attach those lessons to a supernatural figure, well, it makes them all the more memorable.
But I'm guessing she's not always so benevolent.
You're right. Some stories portray her as a guardian of hidden treasures who punishes anyone who's greedy or disrespectful.
It's like she's got this dual nature, a protector and a punisher.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we've explored England and Wales, ready to hop back across the Atlantic and check out some white lady legends from the U.S.
Let's do it. The U.S. has a huge tradition of ghost stories, and white ladies are no exception.
All right, well, let's start with the Susquehanna Screamer of Pennsylvania. She sounds pretty terrifying.
She does. She's said to haunt Susquehanna Road, and people report hearing her blood-curdling screams, but there's no definitive story about who she is or why she screams.
Some people say she's the ghost of a bride who died tragically, while others believe she's a girl who was killed on prom night.
It's a classic example of how these legends can change and adapt over time. Each generation adds its own interpretation, shaping the story to fit their beliefs and experiences.
And it also speaks to our need to explain the unexplainable, even if it means turning to the supernatural for answers.
Absolutely. Those unanswered questions are part of what make these legends so compelling. What happened to her? Why does she scream? It's up to us to come up with our own theories.
Okay, what other U.S. white ladies are on our list?
Well, there's the White Lady of Durand Eastman Park in Rochester, New York. She's often called the Lady in the Lake. And the story goes that she wanders the park searching for her daughter's body.
That's so sad. It's like the ultimate expression of a mother's grief. And it taps into our own fears about losing our loved ones.
And what makes it even more tragic is that she's not trying to harm anyone. She's just desperately searching for her child. A search that's impossible because she's already gone.
Okay, let's move on to the White Lady of Avenel in Virginia. What's her story?
She's thought to be Mary Frances Burwell, a woman who would stand on her front porch every day waiting for her husband to come home from the Civil War. He never did, and now her ghost haunts Avenel, still waiting for him.
It's a reminder of the lasting impact of war on families and the power of love and loyalty. Even in death, she clings to the hope that he might return.
It's a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Our ability to hold on to hope even when all seems lost.
We can't forget about the White Lady from Stephen Crane's short story, the ghostly sphinx of Mittendonk. What makes her stand out?
Well, unlike a lot of the White Ladies we've discussed, she's not looking for revenge or a lost loved one. She's simply reliving a past tragedy. Every year, on the anniversary of her lover's drowning, she reappears.
It's a haunting image. The idea that she's bound to that moment of loss, unable to escape it. But it also makes you think about the power of memory. How certain events can shape us so profoundly that they stay with us even after death.
It makes you wonder if there's a certain beauty in remembering and keeping those we've lost alive through our stories and memories.
Okay, we've got a few more U.S. White Ladies to go. What about the one at Union Cemetery in Connecticut?
People have been reporting sightings of her since the 1940s. She's got the classic look, the white dress, the haunting presence. But the specifics of her story are pretty vague.
Maybe she represents those anxieties we all have about death and the afterlife. We don't know who she is or why she's there. It's that uncertainty that makes her so unsettling.
And it leaves it up to us to interpret what her presence means. Is she a benevolent spirit watching over the cemetery, or a restless soul trapped between worlds? It all depends on what we choose to believe.
What about the White Lady of Wapsie in Pennsylvania? Her story sounds especially creepy.
Yeah, this one is said to haunt the mountains around Altoona. She and her husband supposedly died in a car crash, and now she wanders those roads searching for him. Some say she appears as a hitchhiker but vanishes before reaching her destination. Others say her reflection doesn't show up in mirrors. It's a classic tale of a restless spirit unable to find peace.
It's that idea of being lost and unable to move on that makes her story so tragic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what about Calico Ghost Town in California?
Author Lauren Morgan Richards says he saw a white lady there while he was doing research for his book. It just shows you that even in a place that's known for being haunted, a white lady sighting can still be a chilling experience.
It really speaks to the power of these legends. They transcend time and place and remind us that there's still so many mysteries in the world.
Right, and it begs the question, if these stories are so widespread, could there be some truth to them? Or are they just reflections of our deepest fears and desires?
Okay, how about Fremont, California? They've got a couple white lady legends too, right?
They do. The White Witch and the Prom Dress Girl both are set to haunt the Niles Canyon area. The White Witch is believed to be the ghost of a woman who died in a horse carriage accident, and the Prom Dress Girl is thought to be a high school student who died in a car crash.
It's interesting how both of those stories are connected to specific historical events. It makes them feel more real, more grounded in a landscape.
Exactly, and it gives their hauntings more meaning. They're not just generic ghosts, they're individuals with their own stories, their own tragedies.
Okay, one last stop on our U.S. White Lady tour. Where are we headed?
Let's finish up in Dallas, Texas, at White Rock Lake Park. They have the Lady of White Rock Lake there. She's usually described as a young woman in a wet evening dress, and she's often seen asking for a ride. Witnesses say that she disappears during the drive, leaving behind a wet car seat. Some say she drowned back in the 1930s, and her story was even reported in the Dallas newspapers in the 1960s.
A classic vanishing hitchhiker story. It plays on our fears of the unknown and the idea that we might accidentally stumble into something supernatural.
Right, and the fact that it was in the newspapers blurs that line between folklore and reality. It makes the story that much more believable.
We've traveled all over the world, from Brazil to Thailand, from the UK to the US. We've uncovered so many different white lady legends. What have we learned?
I think we've seen how this archetypes, this idea of the white lady, while it shares those common themes of tragedy and loss and the supernatural, it also adapts to different cultures and historical contexts. These aren't just ghost stories. They're reflections of our deepest fears, our anxieties about society, our fascination with death, and what comes after.
And what's amazing is how these stories continue to have power centuries after they were first told. They tap into something deep within us, a fear of the unknown, a fascination with the afterlife. We want to make sense of the unexplainable.
Exactly. And maybe that's the enduring power of the white lady. She's a blank slate that we can project our hopes and fears onto. She's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there are stories to be told, lessons to be learned, connections to be made.
That's a beautiful way to put it. So what about you, dear listener? What did you take away from all these white lady legends? Do you see them as cautionary tales, tragic figures, or something else entirely?
And why do you think these stories continue to fascinate us after all this time? What is it about the White Lady that keeps us coming back for more?
We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep that lantern lit as you wander through the world of history and folklore.